Well, good morning and welcome to today's Drought Hour. My name is Connie Strunk and I'm a plant pathology field specialist, and I will be your host/moderator for today's session. A couple of just housekeeping things. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in that Q&A feature at the bottom, or a chat or a comment. You can put that into that chat feature and we'll be happy to address them as the meeting progresses. And then we will be showing or offering CCA CEU credits again, and that'll be after each presentation. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker to be Jack Davis. He is our crops business management field specialist, and he is going to talk to us about know your drought numbers for your drought plan. So Jack, if you want to go ahead and share your slides and take it from here.
There, are we up and going? I think it looks good, and
Yep.
Hopefully everybody can hear me decent. Sound good too?
Yep, sound good.
All right, thanks. Well, we got a variety of things we'll look at, but focus on where our crop cycle is, and then a few things on cattle as we get going. And we'll try and go forward. Okay, there we go. Contact information, email is probably the best at this time, and also you could always leave me a message on the phone too. So we're going to highlight what happened in April, and then also look at our grain stocks and prospective planting report. So last Friday, the World Ag and Supply Demand Report came out. Actually, it was on the 9th. So here's what the highlights from March and what had changed. They raised corn exports, raised projected feed usage, ethanol usage as we get back to traveling more, expected use to go up of corn. And so that lowered our projected carryover by 150 million bushel. And the big thing for a rise in price is that we're at a low stocks to use ratio for this crop that we're using up right now. And that's the lowest it's been since 2013. So with that in mind, if we have issues in the new crop growing, the prices will be more responsive to any issues that come up as we start to grow that new crop. Soybeans were really left unchanged. That carryover stayed at 120 million bushels. It may not get lowered much below that because that is a very low stocks to use ratio, that 2.6. They did raise our average projected market year price by 10 cents to 11 1/4 for the 2020 year. On wheat, imports were decreased by 10 million. Feed and residual was decreased, and that was based on what was left over in the stocks to use as of March 1st. Exports were unchanged. The ending stocks did end up increasing a little bit for wheat to a total of 852 million bushel, but that is 17% below what it was last year. On the world, just here's the highlights for that. The world corn ending stocks were forecast down 1.3% versus in March, and it's down 6% versus last year. So a large drop from last year, again, putting upward pressure on prices if there's issues for the U.S. corn crop. Soybeans increased its ending stocks from the March report. So as we came out of this report in April, we saw a little drop in soybeans, and that would be part of it, that we saw that world increase. And on the wheat, ending stocks were forecast lowered by about 5.7 million metric ton. Just want to highlight some average cash corn prices. The green shows this, what would it be, from 2008 to 20. average price was right at 409. And if we break that down into a couple different time periods, 2008 through 10, average cash price in South Dakota was 388. And then we had our boom years going, and our average price during that time was 544. As we came off of that, we went below our average that we had in 2008 to 10. And our average was 328 in 2015 through 2020. And now, just a week or so ago, current bids in the center of the state were at 589. One thing to be noted is that their basis is really narrow. I was just looking at Forsberg, which has usually got a wider basis because of no rail and the little trucking cost. Our current basis is only at 17 cents. So really tight, would indicate that there's not much being offered for sale. So that's something to watch as we go through the year. I know on new crop bids, it's back out to more of a normal at 70 cents, at least at that Forsberg location. And it'll vary across the state. But boy, right now through the summer, basis is really tight, meaning that they want the ending product and aren't able to necessarily get it. So the corn stocks, which would have came out at the end of March, was 61 million bushel less than the trade had expected. That's why we saw that limit up day at the beginning of the month. And they also lowered the December one stocks too by almost 28 million bushel. The blue is what the industry expected, and then the red, as you can see, is what the estimate came out as of that report. Soybeans were 21 million bushel above, but it's well within the expectations, so no real surprise on the soybean side. Moving over to our planting intentions, and these are the time frames when this survey is taking. Is at the end of February and beginning of March, so listing what farmers would expect to plant. And that's the acreage we'll use until we get what's called the actual planting acreage, which comes out in June. And our first look at our new crop will come in the May WASDE World Ag Supply and Demand Expectations report in May. And that'll be our first new crop estimates at that time. So that'll be stuff that people want to watch when I'm talking about knowing your numbers. One of the things that'll be important this year is that planting progress that takes place. And of course, the weather, as Laura's going to talk about, and how that's going to affect our growing conditions. So not only the planting progress, but then also the crop conditions as we go through this growing season will be key in crop prices this year. And the industry or trade was expecting 93.2 million acres, and USDA came in at 91.1. So that again helped support that big jump in corn prices recently. Also on the soybeans, trade was estimating 90, and USDA came in at 87.6, so a little bit below. Taking those two combined, the corn and soybeans have 178.7 million acres. That's 4.5 million acres less than the market had anticipated. I'm going to switch and see how that comes out compared to June actual as we go forward here. But before I got to that, I wanted to show the prevent plant acres in recent years from North Dakota and South Dakota. In not much in 17 and 18, And of course, in 19, we set the record in South Dakota for prevent plant acres. And then in 20, North Dakota had almost 3 million. And we had 1.67 or so prevent plant acres in South Dakota. So there are acres that can probably be planted beyond what we've normally done. I don't know that that goes beyond what our expectations were, but if we're drier this year, maybe those acres will get planted. So looking at South Dakota's March Prospective Planting Intentions, both coming in at about 5.6 million acres for corn and 5.7 for soybeans. So guys, we're probably intending to put soybeans on maybe some of those prevent plant acres that they had missed out on last year. If you think of when the time frame when this was taking place, soybeans were probably leading that acreage war in price because they were priced well above corn, or that ratio that would demand more soybeans or try and buy soybean acres. This is from a national perspective, and what it's doing is taking June acreage minus the March prospective planting intentions. And it just, this is an average here from 14 to 18 for corn and soybeans. So just drawing that line, there's room really, when we look at this, for probably almost 1.5 million extra acres to get planted. And in studying this, we find that it does tend, there's no real pattern, but it does tend to move that 1.5 million to 2 million acres difference between March and June. So there will be room going forward. And again, that points to the importance of watching our planting progress to see if more acres are going to get planted this year than was projected in the March Prospective Planted. Just looking at the same thing for South Dakota, on average, South Dakota would plant about 70,000 less acres corn and about 40,000 acres more soybeans. And that was an average of 14 through 18. I didn't go into 19 and 20 on that. So we could see a shift, but it will all depend on weather and planting conditions as we go forward. This is all crops, or all principal crops, so corn, soybeans, wheat, sorghum, sunflowers, and we can see that our total acreage for South Dakota is right at 16.8 million acre, or yeah, 16.8 million acres. So pretty well steady with 2020 total intentions. Not as high as we were back in when we had the real high prices, but probably a reasonable estimate of what would get planted in South Dakota. Switching a little bit to forage here, and then on to a few topics on cattle. One of the things that we're down on is our hay intentions. So the hay uses harvested acreage, and we are down the lowest we've been in quite some time. Well, the lowest that we've been recently. So right at 3 million acres for hay harvested is what's expected. So that is on the low side. Usually that's at 32, 35, somewhere right in there. So we are down on hay acres. With that being said, our total stocks of hay with the open winter and nice winter, we're coming through that pretty good. Our next report on hay is May 1st. It gives an ending stocks point. So we will see where that ends up as that report comes out, and we'll go forward. One of the tough things in thinking about for drought, we may not have as much hay available, at least on our new crop side, by this planting intentions deal. And one of the things, there will be more demand to plant those acres to the principal crops because of the higher prices. Laura's probably going to talk about this, just showing the amount of hay that's acreage that's in drought nationwide. As of April 13th, that was at 34%. Now, switching to cattle, and just to borrow this from Cattle Facts, and I wanted to point out where we may be in our cattle price cycle. So if and I'm going to go back to our last major drought that we had through the nation and up here in South Dakota, we go back to 11 and 12, and that was a tough year to be in a drought situation, because if you had to liquidate a herd or depopulate, you missed out on these high calf prices by not having those cows around. So just something to think about are those breeding livestock, whether it's cows or sheep or other forage animals. So here we are in 21, and with this projection, we're also headed up on the cattle cycle or price cycle. So just things to think about. Cash flow really becomes crucial to your herd management, and we have to think, work through that cash flow if we got to make changes due to a drought situation, and that is really, really key. So destocking would be just, you're probably going to hang on to them somehow, but you're going to keep them off of the grass. And I'm sure the guys will talk about that in one of the meetings coming up. All different kinds of ways to do that. I'll just throw out a couple. If you run yearlings, you could maybe put them to a feedlot or sell them. Get rid of your less desirable pairs, early weaning, move cattle, just all different kinds of ways to do that. Again, cash flow. So each situation is different for different producers. The other one is depopulating, and that becomes a multi-year decision and an impact on your cash flow and net income. Really a 7 to 10 year influence on cash flow. And then, because then if it does rain and you're able to repopulate, you have that coming back. So I got a few examples that'll run through just quick, big picture on 3 popular methods of doing that and how that might affect your cash flow. So in this one, we're looking at cow numbers or cattle numbers, the black bars being cow herd numbers, and then calf sales. So in this situation, say he's running 400 head, decides to cut 20% off and not keep back any replacements. So we really see a drop off in those first 2 years after drought, and then just repopulating back at a normal retention. So it takes clear back to almost the 8 to 9 years to get back to his 400 head level of repopulating, doing it in this method. Just wanted to show that and how that might work. And you can think about that on how that's going to affect your cash flow. So here's just, like I said, the big picture on different methods of doing that. So this was done using not last year's, but the big drought of 2012, and just some prices from that time period. And if we went, did that first one was the 20%, all of them are a 20% cut in the cow herd, and then not retaining any replacements that first year, and then different methods of repopulating. So in the first one, we we returned to normal retention after a year or so after the drought, and that has a 20 to 30% reduction in our net cash flow. So if we think about it, it would have allowed, over this 10-year period, it would have allowed us, if we were able to hang on to them or thought of a way to hang on to them, it would have allowed us $200 to $250 per cow in that year of the drought that we could have purchased hay. So that's something to think about, that maybe it is worth purchasing hay in the situation we are. And again, that's a tough call, and it's an individual call, because you do not know, when it's going to end. But I think you have to take into consideration where we're at in the price cycle also. So then just looking, you think maybe, well, what if we retain double after we depopulate, and we try and build it back up faster to take advantage of that upward swing in calf prices? Well, that misses out too, and it's surprising a little bit that that's worse than the first option. So we ended up costing us a little more in that situation. And then finally, purchase bred heifers and retain replacements, again trying to build back faster. But part of it comes because our heifer prices, our replacement prices are high, and we're also then, if we're retaining more, we are not able to sell those higher priced calves. So we do lose out versus maybe staying with what we had and spending some money on hay. I'm not advocating that for any situation. I'm just saying you have to do your cash flow. You have to do some projections and make the decisions for your farm or ranch. So it really is. It's cash flow, and that takes some planning, and you have to look out and make some assumptions, and then stay on top of it, monitor it, and work through it, what's actually happening as you go forward. Protecting net worth and assets, and not just your financial net worth, but yourself and family. Protect the livestock and their health, and the health of the land, and finally, of course, financial. That's what I have. I went through it pretty quick. And again, the sun will rise and the creeks will flow. It will come back, and there is hope. There's my contact information, and that's what I had. Any questions?
If there's any questions for Jack, we do have a few minutes to grab them.
I didn't go into all the detail of that. I just wanted to share what an example of running through it using last drought or last major drought. And again, like I said, the tough part is not knowing when that ends and when that gets better for your situation. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Jack, for your presentation. And as you kind of think about things kind of going through, if you have questions for Jack, please go ahead and drop them in that chat or put them in that Q&A. But at this time, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. It'll be Laura Edwards. She's our South Dakota State climatologist, and she's going to share with us the 2021 climate outlook as what she sees so far. Laura is located up in Aberdeen and has been with us for quite some time now. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Yeah, I've been here almost 10 years now, Connie. So thanks for joining us today. And I will talk about the climate outlook. I'll kind of start with where we've been recently, where we're sitting with drought, obviously, using the drought monitor is kind of an indicator of that. But there are some other tools out there too. And just so happened yesterday, I was driving across the state from Spearfish over to Aberdeen on my way home, and stopped at the Ben Ash monument there near Mud Butte. That's where this picture was taken yesterday. certainly I got a good firsthand look at how tough situation is out west, especially along 212. And I see and hear what's going on out there, and not a lot of water anywhere in those draws or stock ponds, and I know it's a tough situation. So for those of you who are experiencing drought anywhere in the state, I do appreciate hearing from you, sharing pictures, anecdotal information, or if you can tell, man, this drought really feels similar to this year or that year, kind of give me some perspective. That really helps us a lot in our assessments on monitoring drought across the state and keeping on top of things when we're visiting with other folks too. Just looking at the last 30 days, kind of because we've kind of finally, this is getting to the spring now where the soils have thawed out. We're starting to look towards a wetter pattern typically this time of year. So where do we stand? And this is the departure from average temperature, or how different from average temperature have we been over the last 30 days? So certainly the last week has been cooler than average. No doubt about that, but over the last month, since mid-March, certainly warmer than average, with the heat really peaking around Easter weekend, that first weekend in April, where we, got up to 80s, 90 degrees around that time. But everywhere across the state, and the warmth is important because number one, it's thawed out our soils, but also heat can sap our moisture out, right? Evaporate our water, whatever we have out there, and get early plant growth out there as well. And so whether that be grass, weeds, crops, whatever the case may be. So temperature we do see is pretty important most of the time. Precipitation, the other part of the story. So there's not an easy way to overlap temperature and precipitation, but I think if you guys have been watching things, out in the eastern part of the state, really over the last 2 weeks, we've seen some pretty good moisture and some improvements in the drought situation over there. In particular, the northeast, east central part of the state. I think this rain had come just at a perfect time when soils were thawed out for the most part, and we're ready to take in that moisture before vegetation has really come out of dormancy and we really have good growth. So perfect timing there. Unfortunately, can't say the same for the northwest, north central part of the state, and I know it's been very dry out that way for the month of March. 0 or near 0 precipitation for a lot of those areas in Perkins County and around that way. So it's kind of a two sides of the same coin there, as we kind of straddle really about 90 to 100 miles between no drought and extreme severe drought. Looking at soil moisture. So this is one of the indicators of drought that we look at in the spring season before things really have gotten going. And we look at precipitation too, but soil moisture is one of our early season indicators here in the spring. And I'll say you can track this each day. This is on the South Dakota Mesonet, our weather station network. On the bottom there is the key, the legend on how to read that. But we call this the poker chip map, where we have a stack of chips at each location where we have these soil sensors. Each chip is representing a sensor that we have at a different depth. So from 2 inches down to 40 inches. So they're not really evenly spaced out, but you can kind of get the gist of that. The darker blue, the wetter it is, the more warm colors, yellow, oranges, the drier it is. So you can kind of see different areas of the state who's kind of carrying more moisture than others. By looking at today or this week versus say last year at this time, soil moisture is down 20 to 50% in some of the drier areas. Just now, recently in the east, things have kind of recovered, so they're not as deficient, I'd say, or not as low as compared to last year. But certainly a lot of the areas in the central and the west, we don't have a big carryover, like we did a year ago this time, that when we followed on that really wet 2019 year. So in some parts of the state, we don't have that reserve to count on for our crop moisture or grass for that matter. So Drought Monitor, this is kind of where we get our snapshot of drought, updated every Thursday morning nationally. And you see that red area, that's D3 extreme drought. That's about a 30 to 50 year drought. That's about that time, that severity, okay? When you get down to the D1 moderate drought, that's maybe like 15, 20 year kind of frequency of drought, something like that. So even if you're in the D2 area or something like that, nothing to shake a stick at. Certainly that's still a severe drought. For those of you who are keeping track at home, I know a year ago this time, that's kind of how we kind of frame things lately anyway, is I get a lot of questions. How different was this year from last year? Well, it's a world of different, right? Last year, the drought map looked like that on the left, no color at all whatsoever. So we've really had a rapid turnaround here. And I think, Jack kind of alluded to some of those decisions that you can make that have multi-year impacts. Same when you're managing drought in general, that to be ready for ups and downs in severity and moisture and all of that. And if you do, maybe as an example, sell some animals, maybe take on some custom grazing or do some other way to market your grass or hay or whatever you have out there. Thinking of when things turn around, because we're seeing more and more of this extremes, wet to dry. 2011, 2012 was another recent example of that, as Jack mentioned. So right now we have about 73% of the state in some level of drought. Jack showed one of these graphs or maps earlier, and I'm going to show a handful of these just to look at some different crops, different parts of agriculture in drought. And so these are from USDA. They update every Thursday when the Drought Monitor updates. So this is corn first. Dark green areas are the primary growing areas with drought. The lighter green, are the minor growing areas of corn in this example. So the red hash color shading is anything D1 or worse on the Drought Monitor. So that's overlapping the areas of drought with the crop or commodity here in the map. So here, this overlaying corn areas and drought. I'm not going to show soybeans because it's very similar region up in this part of the country, but you can get a handle. Corn and soybeans generally are similar, really that southeastern, some of the eastern part of the state in drought. I wanted to show sunflower, and this is one example because almost all of the major growing areas of sunflower are in some level of drought right now. Certainly in the Dakotas, but even as you look further south in western Nebraska and Kansas, almost all the sunflower growing areas in some level of drought. So keeping that in mind too, not just when you're thinking planting decisions, but also marketing and value of what that might mean down the road. Lots of things to consider for sure. Hay growing areas, again, Jack did show this too. I'm not going to show alfalfa hay, very similar again in South Dakota. A lot of area of hay, and alfalfa hay in South Dakota is one of our top commodities. And certainly a lot of drought out there. And then cattle areas and drought. So kind of looking to you guys on the livestock side, certainly seeing a fair bit of South Dakota's cattle areas in drought in the central western part of the state. Again, that doesn't speak to severity of drought much, but just again, D1 or worse on the Drought Monitor in that red shaded area. Kind of taking a turn towards a little different topic now, looking out ahead at the summer. I've had a few questions lately about La Nina or El Nino, what's going on with that, and La Nina this year did not behave as we typically expect. Typically, we see a colder than average winter, and we did not see that at all, except for a brief stint in February. But it's expected that La Nina will kind of fade to more what we call neutral or near average conditions, and then maybe come back at the end of the year in the fall winter season. Let's say we do have La Nina, kind of hang in there. What does that mean for yields? And one of the crops that we've looked at here is corn. And so I'll show this here. Anything in the greens shaded are higher than average yield. Anything in the brown shaded colors are lower than average yield. And so this is looking at La Nina years and how that's corresponded with corn yield. Kind of a mixed bag here in South Dakota. Some areas slightly higher, some areas slightly lower. Nothing really consistent as we've looked historically anyway. Looking further east though, into Minnesota, Iowa, out that way, you do see a little more consistent lower or reduction in corn yield during La Nina years. So there's a potential there that we will see maybe slightly better than average or near average conditions where they might see a little bit lower yield. Also looking at planting conditions, we really kind of peaked on temperature, like I said, around the first weekend of April. Things have really cooled down since then, and soil temperature is one of those things we look at this time of year as people are getting planting. This is again for really starting to look at corn, where you're trying to hit that 50-degree magic mark. This is as of yesterday, 4-inch soil temperature under bare ground. So we're just getting in those 40s, just touching 50 degrees. So not real consistently yet at that 50-degree mark. And this week again looks to be cooler than average air temperatures. Later this week will be 30s, 40s-ish. So not a lot of warming expected on soil temperatures in the next week. But we'll get there. And I think folks are being pretty patient so far this year. And with these cooler temperatures too, I don't think we'll lose a lot of our soil moisture that we've gained on the eastern side of the state, hopefully. Just to share another tool from the South Dakota Mesonet from the website. If you go into local data for individual stations, this is an example from Groton up in Brown County. And at the top is kind of a plot that shows two different things. The purple at the top is rainfall. And then these bars, these lines at the bottom, these 5, those are our soil moisture sensors. So you can see how they respond to precipitation events. So this was back looking at April 6th through 8th, where we got some rain, moistened up the soil a little bit, as you saw flush up to the blue colors, and then you kind of see it gradually dry down. So this is one way where you guys can kind of track your soil conditions around the state, looking at the Mesonet data and how quickly it responds to precipitation events. And then at the bottom is looking at all our soil temperature sensors, and each color represents one of the sensors. So we've got a bare ground sensor at 4-inch, and then all the others are under sod, and you can kind of trace the colors here. So looking at Groton as of last Thursday, they were all between 36 and 40 degrees. They warmed up a little bit since then, but you can kind of see where all the soil is sitting and if it's ready to go, and it looks hopefully soon as we warm up. I think we have decent moisture anyway to get started at that location. So looking ahead, 7-day total precipitation. So not really optimistic. I know some of you out west are seeing snow this morning and some pretty cold temperatures in the Southwest too. After today, it's maybe, hit or miss here in a couple days. A couple people out east might see some moisture, but really very quiet. in the next 7 days for precipitation. And with that, cooler than average temperatures expected to hold for the coming week as well. As we look further ahead, so this is the end of April, early May, so April 26th to May 2nd, just at the turn of the month. On the left is temperature. You see that area that's holding in colder than average, slowly moving off to the east as warmer temperatures kind of come up from the southwest and start to peak into South Dakota. This would be the end of April, the last few days of April, into the first week of May. Along with that, on the right, you see precipitation and how probable are we to be wetter or drier than average. Odds are still leaning towards drier than average. So it really looks like the next 2 weeks, not seeing a lot of moisture across South Dakota for the most part. Below average is expected for the next 2 weeks, unfortunately. As we get into our wettest time of year, April, May, June, early July, makes up 40, maybe more than that, maybe close to 50% of our annual moisture for a lot of the states. So we're really at that critical time of year for moisture. And each week we miss out. Each week counts really a lot. So looking ahead towards May, this is the outlook that came out last Thursday from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. They've really backed off on warmer than average temperatures in May, and that's on the left side. Now equal chances of warmer, cooler, or near average temperatures, except for the far southern tier of the state. And again, I think they're looking at a cooler start of May, as I kind of just showed there in that week 2 map. Precipitation wise, again, not a lot of agreement, not a lot of consensus in the climate models at this point what May might bring. So equal chances of wetter, drier, or near average. I know we'd really like to see a little bit wetter conditions to make up for some of the drought that we're seeing out here, but doesn't look not really highly likely anyway in May. Thing to keep in mind though is even with below average moisture, if we kind of get those timely rains, and I know a lot of you guys probably know this anecdotally anyway, if we can just get some timely rains, that can kind of help keep us steady and keep us going and still get decent productivity this year. But we'll have to keep an eye out on what May looks like. NOAA will update this at the last day of the month. So on the 30th of April, that Friday, this map will update for May, and we'll see what they say there. May, June, and July, so looking at that 3-month period, this is where we start to see that warmer signal kick in, warmer and drier in the summer. So it's been pretty consistent the last few months, with summer looking towards warmer and drier. And this is a very similar story again that they released last Thursday. Again, this isn't actual amounts, but probabilities. So on the left there, the darker the red, the more probable, the more likely we'll see warmer than average temperatures. On the right there is precipitation. So again, the darker the brown, the more likely to see drier conditions. So maybe not the news we want to hear, at least for the western side of the state, central and western side of the state. So keeping this in mind, I'd certainly be thinking of your drought plan and what are your options, and maybe taking some action sooner rather than later to kind of get ahead of this, because it looks like kind of a tough season here midsummer. As we look out ahead even further into July through September, towards the late summer period, again, odds leaning towards warmer than average all across the country. And on the right there, odds also leaning towards drier than average for that mid to late summer as well. So not to say we can't see some ups and downs in the drought conditions across South Dakota, as we've already seen, some response to rainfall and things improve, and things can also get worse back and forth. So, but it looks like long term, at least through July, looks pretty likely that drought will hang on in some way, shape, or form for a lot of us. And that's what this map is showing. Looks at the drought monitor areas of D1 or worse. Are they likely to improve or stay in drought? And that brown color is indicating a lot of that area is likely to stay in some level of drought at the end of July. The yellow area indicates that drought development is likely by the end of July in that south central part and into Nebraska. So that's what NOAA has to say. And I don't think I disagree. I think, again, we'll see some ups and downs most likely. But I think overall, it looks like drought may be hanging on here for the growing season. Overall, I mean, we've talked about planting, pretty favorable planting conditions likely. We're just waiting for a little warmth to come around our way. But I think the soils are ready for the most part as far as moisture goes. Warmer than average, again, with the heat combined with the drier outlook, that is kind of a recipe for drought to hang on in some way. And a little uncertain on precipitation in May, but after that it does look kind of setting up drier. Two, we don't have as much soil moisture, and I mentioned this earlier, to carry us through the growing season like we did last year. We started to see that precipitation shortage start to grow, that deficit start to grow last year. We didn't see any real big impacts on yield or productivity, but that's not to, we don't have that advantage of that soil moisture kind of bank account right now. So really we're going to rely on those rainfall events more so this year than we did last year. With that, I think that's what I have to share. I'll leave up my contact information up here. I also am pretty active on social media if you guys want to follow me on Twitter and Facebook. And I don't know if this has been mentioned before, but the Extension Regional Centers and a handful or more of the county offices are going to be doing water testing and nitrate testing and forages this year. So if you have concerns about that, please give our offices a call and we'll connect you with what kind of samples we need and who can do that analysis for you. So just want to keep that in mind for you folks out there. So with that, Connie, I could take questions, or I don't see the chat right now. So
if there's any questions for Laura, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A or put them in the chat. Right now, I don't see anything, Laura, for questions.
Okay.
I'm going to make a comment, Laura, in just to kind of maybe get started. One of the things that can hurt us grass-wise is these cold temps, and then if we jump right to that hot, because much of it, I'm talking eastern South Dakota, much of it has decent subsoil to keep those grasses growing. But if we don't give our cool seasons that temperature opportunity, that can put us in drought pretty fast. I'm thinking back to, I can't remember if it was 12 or 13 that happened. I think it was actually 13, maybe, that it happened. But I know one of the years I was complaining quite a bit on the drought. Not near as bad as what the folks have it now, but it was just because it was so cool, and then it turned hot right away that we didn't have a growing time for our cool season grass, and the majority of it is cool season.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up, Jack. And that is more common in drought years, actually, because dry air can heat and cool faster than moist air. And so we see those big fluctuations in temperature in dry years or drought years. Another example, in 2017, up in the north central part of the state, they dipped down to freezing the third week in June. and had frost damage up there, if you remember that, on some of the wheat and corn crop actually. So it's sometimes hard to separate what's the frost or freeze damage from drought damage, but certainly they do often go hand in hand. Similar in the southwest corner of the state, we saw that in 2016 too, some late frost in May. So it's not uncommon to see those as something to keep in mind for sure. Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions in the
Thanks.
Q&A. When would be the best time to plant for a small gardener, especially with the storms?
Okay, yep. So for gardening, I'm not sure where you are from, Lorraine, but I did show our average last frost. So average last spring frost in the southeastern part of the state is usually the end of April, like the 22nd to 25th, probably around there. If you're in the western side of the state, it's more like May 15th. So if you're worried about frost, I'd wait a little longer still for gardening. I do know some of the early season stuff like potatoes and things can go in usually about now. But I know we have master gardeners in 3 of our regional centers that are really good at answering those questions. That's in Rapid City, Aberdeen, and Sioux Falls. So reach out to one of those regional centers too, and they can help answer that question.
There's another question. There was a prediction of a very major drought to hit Iowa in 23 or 25. I don't remember. It was based on a 90-year give or take cycle. Have you seen this?
Yeah, that sounds like one of my colleagues in Iowa. He tends to talk about drought and cycles. I haven't seen that specifically, but we have seen some more extremes. When you're looking at like the east side of the state, like the Big Sioux River area, that watershed, we haven't seen a dry year like this in about a decade, since 2012, 2013. But out west, we see a lot more fluctuations up and down, a lot more interesting climate, maybe is the way to say it, nice way. So, I'd expect we're going to continue to see ups and downs every few years. And I think just thinking about that long-term planning, how can you kind of minimize your losses in these tough years and still take advantage of the good years when we have a lot of productivity. I think that's something to keep in mind. And again, our agronomy and livestock natural resource friends can help us with managing that.
And also just want to talk about our drought hour, which will be coming up on April 26th. So I'd like to invite you to come back to join us. The topic will be considerations before turning cattle out to graze. So if there's any other additional questions for Jack or Laura, now would be a great time to put them in the Q&A.
Since we had that question about the gardening and frost dates, I might share my screen here to show a map quick. There we go. So this is our data of the median date for the last spring frost, 32 degrees. So you can see down in the southeast corner, around April 26th to 29th for the most part. But out west looks more like May 18th to 20th, 22nd even for some of the far west. So that might help people on their gardening. I usually wait until Mother's Day personally up in Aberdeen. That's kind of my benchmark day when I start thinking about planting.
We've got a poll here. If you'd be so kind to answer this poll, it will help us as we prepare future webinars and kind of put some justification as to why we're doing different things out there for our funding agencies.
Jack, not to put you on the spot here, but I recall we may have had some calculators or online tools to help with making decisions during drought and, looking at feed costs and, all the transportation costs and other things, are those still online?
That's a good question. And I think the guys are going to run through some tools next week too on the turnout stuff for sure. And I'm speaking out of turn, but I believe that's what they're going to do. So those will be available and out, and we'll make sure like the other stuff is updated.
Yeah, I know it's not exactly your area. So
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks. Oh, there's Heather. Yep. Heather says yes, they are still online. Those calculators.
All right, kind of final call for questions or comments. Well, I want to thank you for tuning in today for today's webinar, and thank you, Laura and Jack, for your presentations. It's
You're
great
welcome.
information, and glad that you're able to share that with all of us. And we look forward to seeing you guys next week for our presentation at the next Drought Hour, 11 a.m. Central on April 26th, for considerations before turning cattle out to graze. So with that, thank you and have a good week.
Thanks.